68 Chinese Air Force fighter jets and 13 warships come dangerously close to Taiwan. China's reckless provocation angers the US. Washington DC summons Beijing's ambassador and condemns the military action. China hits back at the US. China, Taiwan and US tensions escalate. Is China preparing for war? That's our top focus on India First. There is a sharp spike in tensions and the world is worried. China has claimed it fired missiles and rockets close to the waters of Taiwan. The US summoned the Chinese ambassador and launched a strong protest. China cancelled at least 6 sets of engagements with the US, including climate change dialogue and maritime security dialogue. But can this escalation lead to a shooting war between China and Taiwan? And is China being called out by ASEAN and G7 countries? What does that mean? I'm Gaurav Sawant. We'll get you much more on this big story, but as always, let's get started with the headlines on India First. Union Home Minister Amit Shah hits out at the Gandhi family over their Black Friday protest, says the Congress timed its protest on the 2nd anniversary of the Sri Ram Mandir Foundation. Rahul Gandhi and Priyanka Gandhi Vadra released after 4 hours in detention. Rahul Gandhi declares dictatorship in India and the end of democracy. Former Bengal Minister Parth Chatterjee and his close associate Arpita Mukherjee remanded to 14 days in judicial custody. The Enforcement Directorate tells the court there is a threat to Arpita's life. Mamata Banerjee meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Delhi, demands that over 1 crore pending central funds for her state be released forthwith. Pakistan provokes on the 3rd anniversary of Article 370 purge. India today accesses an anti-India toolkit to spread propaganda against India. Non-local labourer killed in a grenade attack in Pulwama. The situation is escalating from 27 fighter jets and bombers that crossed the median line yesterday. The figure has shot up to 68 Chinese fighter jets and bombers that crossed the median line between mainland China and Taiwan in the Taiwan Straits. Is China studying Taiwan's response? How long will this escalation continue? Taiwan too scrambled its jets, activated its air defense systems, and the president of Taiwan insisted the country stands firm. The United States summoned the Chinese ambassador. G7 issued a statement telling China not to use Nancy Pelosi's visit to escalate military tension. "68 armed Chinese Air Force fighter jets flew close to Taiwan, violating an agreement to not cross the median line in the Taiwan Straits. This is a major provocation after 27 fighter jets on day 1 of the Chinese war drills. 13 Chinese Navy warships also violated the existing norms, sailing beyond the halfway mark in the Taiwan Straits. Taipei responded by launching its own interceptor fighter jets and activating the missile defense system, insisting they were not intimidated by China.
这不但破坏了 I want to stress that we will not escalate conflict or provoke disputes, but we will firmly defend sovereignty and national security and stand by the line of democracy and freedom.
The United States has hit out at what Washington DC described was China's irresponsible actions. The US has condemned Chinese military action, insisting there was no change in their One China policy. The US summoned China's ambassador and lodged a strong protest.
The United States will not be provoked. We'll continue to do what we've done for a long time. We'll support cross-strait peace and stability and a free and open Indo-Pacific. We'll continue to conduct standard air and maritime transits through the Taiwan Strait, consistent with our long-standing approach to working with allies and partners to uphold freedom of navigation and overflight, which has enabled the region's prosperity for many decades.
Undeterred by global criticism for the provocative actions, Beijing hit back at the US. China announced a series of cancellations, saying there would be no more military theater command communications, no more meetings of defense committees, no more maritime security dialogue, no more illegal migrant repatriation, no more climate talks, and no more criminal justice assistance.
If the US really wants to take on responsibility, it must immediately stop interfering in China's internal affairs for any reason and under any excuse. It must immediately stop using the salami tactics to encroach on and hollow out the One China policy.
China is also angry with the statement made by the G7 group of nations telling China not to use US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to justify its military aggression. ASEAN countries too sought dialogue for de-escalation of tension, but with China continuing to fire missiles and for the first time close to Taiwan's territorial waters, the situation is only set to escalate. Bureau Report, India Today. And joining me on India First is Sana Hashmi. She's a visiting fellow at Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. Inar Tanjan is an advisor at the Taipei Institute. And we will talk to both about the current situation and is it likely to escalate in the days ahead. But before that, I quickly want to cut across and listen in to Nancy Pelosi's statement in Japan. Now, despite repeated warnings of severe consequences from China, US Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she stands by her visit to Taiwan. She reaffirmed US solidarity with Taiwan. Of course, there are sanctions against her and her family. She cannot visit China. But Pelosi reiterates that while her Asia trip may have led to China holding these unprecedented military drills, it was never about changing status quo.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has defended her high-profile visit to Taiwan earlier this week, claiming it was never intended to change the regional status quo, but rather to preserve peace in the Taiwan Strait. Speaking at a news conference in Tokyo on Friday, Pelosi addressed the Chinese military drills and missiles which went off around the island in the wake of her unannounced but highly anticipated visit. She further vowed not to isolate the self-ruled island claimed by Beijing.
They may try to keep Taiwan from visiting or participating in other places, but they will not isolate Taiwan by preventing us to travel there. We've had high-level visits, senators in the spring, a bipartisan way, continuing visits, and we will not allow them to isolate Taiwan.
Pelosi's stop in Taiwan marks the highest-level visit by a U.S. official in 25 years, where she met with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and praised the island's democracy and human rights record. Beijing was quick to condemn Pelosi's trip, which also took her through Singapore, Malaysia, and South Korea before ending in Japan, one of Washington's closest allies. 5 of the missiles fired off by Beijing this week landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone, prompting further warnings from Tokyo that increasing Chinese military activity in the Taiwan Strait threatens both national and wider regional security. China's military exercises near Taiwan have further disrupted key shipping lanes and prompted several commercial airlines to reroute or cancel their flights around the island for the time being. In response to the increasing military action nearby, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen said Taiwan would not provoke conflicts but would firmly defend its sovereignty and national security. Premier Su Tseng-chang had stronger words, referring to China as the, quote, evil neighbor showing off her power at our door.
So Taiwan's called China the evil neighbor next door. In our tangent, US summoned the Chinese ambassador and condemned the military action. China's being called out, being called irresponsible. Sir, the question that's being asked is, if there is no change in the US stated policy of one China, why is Beijing targeting Taiwan?
Well, if there's no change in the policy, exactly. But there is. I mean, Biden said on 2 occasions that he was determined to defend Taiwan. If you go back and read the 3 communiques that were initiated in the 70s, early 80s, you'll see that it was agreed that there's only one China, that the relations with Taiwan would be very low-key, unofficial. So, you know, this is a direct contradiction of that. It's an abrogation. This isn't the first time that the U.S. has walked away from its treaty obligations, whether it's the Paris Climate Accord, Kyoto, the UNCLOS.
So take on the U.S., why target tiny Taiwan? I mean,
Taiwan
you can't take on the U.S.
China.
China cannot take on the U.S.
Stop asking,
so it's targeting.
you're asking kind of absurd questions. Look at the history. The U.S. kicked Taiwan out of the UN and said that it is part of China. Now it's trying to say that Taiwan has the right to have any kind of system it wants and that it will defend it. Can those 2 things be reconciled? I don't think so.
Either way,
so
what justifies the use? I'm just asking, I just want to understand, sir, what justifies sending 68 aircraft, crossing the median line, or 13 warships, or firing so close to Taiwan's territorial waters? But let me take this to Sana Hashmi. Sana Hashmi, the escalation, the firing close to Taiwan's territorial waters, is this testing Taiwan's response and limits? How are China's actions being viewed in Taiwan? Some kind of a dress rehearsal perhaps for an actual assault, as some argue?
I think that it's hardly about Nancy Pelosi's visit first. I think it has been building up since 2016, at least, since Tsai Ing-wen came to power. So I don't think it's at all about Pelosi's visit. And of course, as you said, that it's one of the things is to test Taiwan's preparedness. And I think now that we have seen that they are also targeting US today sanctions by sanctioning Pelosi and the 8 countermeasures, I think it's also about how China has viewed Indo-Pacific, that it views it's led by the US. And now I feel that it's kind of retaliation to the Indo-Pacific and Quad as well. So I think we have to see the broader picture. But now if we talk about Taiwan's response, I think Taiwan's response has been to have consistent interaction with the people through social media statements, just to tell people what's actually happening in Taiwan and apprising the world of what's actually happening in the Taiwan Strait. What is China doing? Its response has been firm and calm as of now, but at the same time, there is reiteration of its position that Taiwan believes in the status quo, but will fight to defend its sovereignty. So I feel they're also trying to urge the international community to support Taiwan and to see Taiwan's perspective too.
Okay. On our tangent, G7 countries also criticized China, said do not use Nancy Pelosi's visit as an excuse to justify military aggression. Sir, are China's actions being called out as inappropriate by democracies in different parts of the world?
Do you mean the same democracy that is trying to extend NATO into the South China Seas and Asia as a way of containing China? Is that the one? These are the same powers, the G7. I mean, you know, the European powers. Well, come on. I mean, this is disingenuous. The fact is, if you want to look at the wider picture, Nancy Pelosi's husband is pleading not guilty to driving under intoxicated. She's the subject, and he's going to be the subject of investigations when
How
the
is Nancy
House
Pelosi's
turns Republican.
husband central to any discussion
My point
on what
is that
China is doing to Taiwan, sir?
She is trying, her visit was trying to deflect the attention of people away from her problems, the fact that she's going to be no longer the Speaker of the House. If it goes to the Republicans, there's a 17% chance that the Democrats will keep the House.
Why should
she has
Xi
a
Jinping
president.
then help her? Why wasn't this visit treated with the contempt that it should have deserved? Be that as the case, sir. I'm just trying to understand. Is China just using this as an excuse to ramp up military pressure on Taiwan, try to take Taiwan by force?
It is not an excuse. If you recall, China said adamantly and forcefully that there would be consequences if she went there, that they were afraid that because of Biden's actions and the actions of the last three presidents, that the three communiques were being put aside. They were being cast off. Donald Trump's advisors advised him during the beginning of his presidency to abrogate those communiques and go forward without them. So China has every right to believe that the U.S. has been gaslighting it with this, now you see it, now you don't, we'll defend it, oh, I'm sorry, we'll walk that back, and then saying it again, and then walking it back, changing in State Department websites.
And in your view, that justifies holding sea lanes of communication to ransom?
Okay, and in terms of India, what have you done in Kashmir?
No, don't worry. Don't worry about Kashmir. There is no similarity. There's no similarity. I'm sorry, that's disingenuous. Let's stay on the issue of Taiwan and China.
The issue is if Taiwan is part of China. That has been acknowledged by the world, the UN, and everybody else. The U.S. is now trying to change that. So China, of course, is upset, and they're trying to make it very clear that this is not something, this is a red line. This is not something you dance around. So every country has their red lines. You have yours, and China has theirs. You need to respect that.
Sana Hashmi, some argue that China is behaving like a bully. In fact, your Prime Minister said China is behaving, Taiwan's Prime Minister said, China is behaving like an evil neighbor next door. But some analysts argue China is actually validating some of its doctrines, war doctrines and war games. The current military drills are perhaps a dress rehearsal for actual operations to take over Taiwan by force in the years to come. Is that an appreciation even in Taiwan, that perhaps in the next 2 years, maybe 5 years, this is exactly how China will try and take Taiwan by force?
I think in Taiwan there is no timeline with respect to that, but you're totally right about it. I think once Xi Jinping secures the third term, it's going to be very difficult for Taiwan, I agree, but I don't agree with my fellow speaker that the US policy on Taiwan has changed at all. Even if Biden has said thrice in a year that we have a commitment to defend Taiwan, White House backtracked that. So I don't see there's any official change in the policy. Unless and until it's on paper, how can we even say that there's a change in policy? And I don't think a lot of countries have actually recognized Taiwan as a part of China. They have acknowledged and kind of accepted the one China policy, but it's a totally different thing that they recognize Taiwan as a part of China. So I don't really agree on that point. But I think it's totally, it's highly provocative, and they're now targeting, like what they did yesterday, the missile that flew over Taipei and landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone. That means that they're ready to hit the civilians as well. And I don't know how this is actually justified.
Okay. Inart Anjan, you want to respond to that, sir?
Yeah, at a time when the U.S. is experiencing huge inflation, what is this doing for the people of the United States? Why is she there? Why was this important? Why did she know that when she went there that she was provoking China? Did she go there? And this idea, I'm sorry, I guess my colleague is not a lawyer. She doesn't understand how these things work. But with the legal document, a communique, once you've agreed to it and you've put your solemn word on it, it's not subject to interpretation just because your time changes. It is either in effect or it is not in effect. If you want to be honest, you can say, look, we abrogate it.
Lawyers, you say, would be firing missiles the way China is firing missiles. Lawyers would send in fighter jets the way China is sending in fighter
Okay,
jets? I'm
yes.
just trying to understand
Yeah,
because...
okay.
you know,
I know you don't understand because you fail to go back to the time. You know, the U.S., there was never a ceasefire between mainland China and Taiwan. It was the U.S. 7th Fleet that intervened and prevented the Chinese mainland from taking back the country from Chiang Kai-shek. I mean, that part of the country from Chiang Kai-shek. That was foreign interference. You should have some appreciation of how colonial powers have been.
Or is that what is required even today?
China does not need to have. You have to understand
lanes of
something very
communication
simply.
need to be kept open, Sana Hashmi. You know, the U.S. 7th Fleet, the Pacific Fleet, is Taiwan expecting a bigger role? How long can Taiwan, take on this blockade? It's impacting Taiwan, it's impacting Japan, it's impacting South Korea, it's impacting trade. But what are Taiwan's red lines? Or are they being reworked?
Now the approach is to just wait and watch, and we have to see if China continues the military intimidation post Sunday. But of course, military intimidation would be there in terms of encroachment, in terms of what we are seeing right now. But I think it could be a mix of military plus diplomatic and also verbal bricksmanship. And I don't think Taiwan is looking for escalation, but what we are seeing that, of course, G7 statement, but we're also seeing strong responses from US, Japan, and South Korea. They are planning to resume the trilateral military exercise. So I think it's hard for China as well. Is China really trying to form two groups with the Indo-Pacific countries on one hand and China, Russia, North Korea on another hand? So I think I strongly believe that it's actually retaliation to what has been happening since the emergence of the Indo-Pacific construct. So it's just not about Taiwan, it's just not about Taiwan's increasing profile at the international stage. There is a larger perspective that we have to understand here.
In our tangent, is China actually trying to push the envelope, saying how much will the world actually accept? What happened between 2014 and 20 when China was trying to militarize these waters? The world response may have been muted. But has President Xi Jinping bitten more than what he can chew at this point of time? Clearly the indications are the world is reacting.
What do you mean by militarize the waters? You mean between the Taiwan Straits, the one where the U.S. warships are sailing up and down every month? Are you saying that they militarize that? That's been at a status quo for quite some time. The fact is that 1/3 of Taiwan's economy depends on the mainland. So over $70 billion in investment, hundreds of thousands of jobs.
And vice versa, would China not be impacted? Would China not be impacted by Taiwan?
But you have to remember the scale. China is much larger than Taiwan. Taiwan, if China doesn't need to
I'm trying to understand, sir. Is it just Taiwan, or would there be consequences, whether it's United States of America or Europe or other countries in the world?
China would not have to fire a single bullet in order to bring Taiwan down to its knees. The fact is that China regards Taiwanese as fellow Chinese. What they don't like
to be brought down to their knees is what you're saying, sir.
The U.S.-backed government there, Tsai Ing-wen, who was facing election, who was, according to the Taiwanese newspapers, secretly invited Nancy Pelosi to come. Why? For political reasons. This is not to help her country. You know, at the same time that Nancy Pelosi says, I stand with Taiwan, she's responsible for passing a bill that's going to subsidize American chip companies so that they can compete against Taiwan. Taiwan supplies 90% of the chips.
Let me get Sana Hashmi to respond to this.
Finish.
Sana Hashmi, no, I want to understand. Sana Hashmi, China wants to bring Taiwan to its knees. That is the tactics, perhaps immediate tactics now, immediate goal now, long-term takeover even by force.
If they wanted to, you really need to pay attention to what people are saying.
You must listen to what you said, sir. But let me get Sana Hashmi to respond.
I said if they want to take
is Taiwan feeling isolated? Is there an apprehension, Sana Hashmi, that China seeing what happened in Ukraine? America promised a lot of assistance, but it remained restricted to weapons and intelligence. Should the same happen here, then China perhaps can do better than what Russia did in Ukraine.
First, I would really like to respond to my fellow speaker. First, I think we have to really distinguish between the moves that have been done by federal government and the Congress. And I think congressional visits have been very common, and we have to accept that it's normal. Taiwan is not really asking for independence. And even Nancy Pelosi didn't really talk about China when she was here. So I think China really overreacted. And you're talking about China treating Taiwan and Taiwanese as Chinese. But I think you really have to ask Taiwanese what they actually think about themselves. And I don't know if you have really looked at any literature, recent literature on that, but you would see that there is a huge change in how Taiwanese are perceiving themselves. So I believe that they have a right to self-determination, and we have to respect that first. We have to really ask the Taiwanese what they want. And about your question, I feel that more than the US, it's Japan as well. And Japan has said several times that our security is linked to Taiwan's security. And I think by doing all this, China is also targeting Japan. And I'm pretty sure after Pelosi's visit that US is also committed to defend Taiwan. But I'm pretty sure that other Indo-Pacific countries are also thinking about their response in a case of any invasion from China.
Okay, but will there be an invasion, or will there be gradual choking of Taiwan in the weeks, months and years ahead? We'll be tracking that story very closely. Inar Tanjan and Sana Hashmi for joining me here on India Today. Many thanks.